it's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story Podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hello, everyone, and I'm excited to have a really incredible guest, a guest that you might not expect in this series. Her name is Julia Sun. She is a make it happen millennial, as I see it. And what I love about it, there's always so much talk about the millennials and this about the millennials and that about the millennials. I don't necessarily feel it that way. I see the millennials as an amazing generation. So I wanted to see, as women, what does Julia have to share about her generation and what they're doing? Let me share a little bit about Julia's background. She's a pretty dynamic girl, I got to tell you. She's out of Silicon Valley. I'm not quite sure which Asian descent, but Asian descent with the upbringing of the careers of acceptability are doctor, lawyer, and engineer. And then here comes Julia. And she's going to share a little bit about her journey. Worked on getting into Stanford, took the rejections, and didn't let it stop her. And that's the kind of woman she is that we're going to learn more about today. And how she kind of breaks through what is traditional and stands in what she's determined to have in her life. So welcome, Julia Sun. Thanks for coming on today.
Ivy. Hi, Ivy. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me on. You're being so sweet. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And like you said, I am from Silicon Valley, and my parents are mostly Chinese. So, like you said, there is a certain expectation of what you can become. And in my family, it's, doctor, lawyer, engineer. If you're really bad at math, sure, you can become a scientist. But those are the choices, right? So in my neighborhood, during my childhood, it had never occurred to me that anything outside of the scientific arena or being a doctor, lawyer, anything else is even a viable option. So I went through the traditional way. I got really good grades in school. What else? And then, fast forward, I went to college and eventually I came to New York. And that's what changed my whole life. In New York.
And I love, I have to interrupt for a second because I love and everybody's going to check out your site and read more about you because it is amazing. One thing I happen to love, it's when I didn't get into Stanford, oh, dear Lord, I guess I had to settle for Cornell in an Ivy League school.
Well, because I went to this high school in Cupertino, San Jose, California. It's called Lindbergh High School. And my high school happens to be one of those ultra-competitive high schools that if you don't have a 4.0, you are by definition not the top quarter of the class. It's that competitive. And so there is a certain expectation that you have to do this, you have to do that. And I know that my year, our class was had about 450 people, and about 120 of us applied to Stanford early decision. And I know that Stanford had 2 dedicated admission officers just to read files from my high school. So the competition was
good Lord.
Exactly. And when you are 16, think about it, to put yourself in that context, and you have all these emotional stress, and then you have to keep up the grades, and you have to write your essay and do your community service. It's a lot of work, and you sort of don't step aside and think objectively and say, oh, actually, my score is pretty good. I am good enough. But, when you are in that zone, you feel, God, I'm so much worse than everyone else around me. So that's where that feeling came from, is you always, we people like to compare ourselves to the people around us. And in my surrounding at the time, I was, to put it so plainly, a loser.
Okay, so tell about, share with our audience now about Julia the loser today and all the amazing things that you have navigated and accomplished.
Oh, thank you. So
share a little bit about the journey. You came into New York afterwards, and you hit the Wall Street track.
Yes. So before I went to Cornell, I was actually debating between Berkeley and Cornell. So I got rejected by Stanford, but I got into Berkeley and Cornell. And if you're somebody from California, it's always one of those, struggles. Like, do you stay close to home, or do you go to some part of the country that's going to be completely different? Because let's face it, East Coast is very different from California. We're so chill, and East Coast is like, oh, okay, we're elite. But at the time, I really just wanted to see a different part of the country. And also, I didn't want my mom to visit me every 2 weeks. So I picked the East Coast. Exactly. That's the real reason. And then I came to the East Coast, and, I never expected to be exposed to this whole new world of something else other than this whole engineering and science. So from Cornell, because Cornell's proximity to New York City, I eventually landed a job at Wall Street. I was very lucky at the time because I graduated class of 06, and if you recall, 06 was before the financial crisis, before the market crash.
Correct.
It was a time when somebody like me, a fresh graduate, didn't need any experience in economics or finance or business to land a job on Wall Street, because back then, around maybe 04 to 07, that was a time when New York Wall Street valued quantitative skill, aka math and computer science or coding skill. So that's how I got in. I wouldn't say that strategy works today as well, but back then it was a way in, and that was my way in. And when I got onto Wall Street, it was a totally different world, and cause I didn't have any training, I'd never taken any class in econ or finance or business. So I remember I was sitting in training, and the Wharton guy on my left, the Wharton guy on my right, they were falling asleep. They were like, this accounting is so easy. And I was like, what accounting? What are you talking about? So I learned everything on the job. But I also feel because I learned everything on the job, I know how to apply those concepts in real life better, better than the other people who learned at in a classroom setting. So I
because you had the ability to not just read it in a book, but actually learn it and instantly apply it.
Exactly. So I tried, the things I learned in training on the desk, on road shows and pitch meetings, all that. And, it was, typical Wall Street analyst things, and it was fine. But guess what? I was in New York City, and New York City, it's really the city of possibilities. So in New York City, I was exposed to other things. For example, in the beginning, I was exposed to people who performed on stage. I was exposed to fashion designers. Like, whoa, you guys actually exist, because I didn't know that. And then so I made friends with all sorts of people. And one year I said, you know what, Julia, if you were good at math, you were good at science, but if one thing you're not so good at, it's the ability to speak to people, make a presentation. Basically, your people skills sucks. And so I said, you know what, I actually want to change that a little bit. So I went to take presentation classes. I went to take speech classes. I had coaches here and there. I took some acting classes. So I actually took a really good, actually a few really good classes at this improv theater called the Upright Citizens Brigade. I highly recommend that.
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to jump in. Well, I'm going to jump in. I think improv training is some of the best business training you can do.
I agree. I absolutely agree with that. And
many people miss that. So I love that you shared it. It's not something that has been really shared that much about. But and it's not just about being in front of the camera. it is about really being a great listener and how to bounce off others' thoughts, concepts, and what they're sharing.
Exactly, because the whole, the principle, the foundation about improv is yes and in order to say yes to something, you have to understand what the other person is saying. And without listening,
I love
it's
that
impossible
you shared
to get
that.
there.
Thank you, because that's so along the line that touches my heart in my own teaching. And when I'm working with, leaders of all sorts, of that, it just heightens that listening skill and that able to lead skill. So it's also a great sales training technique.
Yes, because in your career, in your, daily work, I'm sure you've come across a lot of brilliant people. They're good talkers, they're good doers, they get things done, et cetera, but they don't necessarily receive information so well. And I think improv is one of those, very good tools to sharpen up the listening skill.
Love it. So how did you end up with Julia Sun TV?
Okay,
how did the analyst, right, out of Cornell on Wall Street in her early years, jump forward today to be an impactful millennial who makes a difference in your generation and the way people think, act, and move?
Well, again, you're being very sweet. So when I was taking all these acting, improv, presentation classes, I performed with my improv troupe in New York City. It was called Los Banditos del Canto. And throughout this whole performance journey, I met a lot of actors, and I started doing theater a little bit on the side, but purely for the reason that I want to be a better speaker, I want to be a better listener, I want to be a better presenter. And then I remember, this totally happened by accident, that one day I went to a theater audition, and I totally bombed that audition. And when I got out of the room, I was like, oh, crap, I screwed it up. And then I was walking across the hallway, and I saw this audition going on in the other room, and there was nobody in line. And so I went up, and I asked them, like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, oh, we're looking for a host. And I was like, what the hell is a host? And then the person said, oh, it's like we're doing this show. It's about, lifestyle, where we're going to New York City to see what to buy, what to wear, what to eat, where to shop and stuff. Are you interested? I'm like, yeah, whatever. I'm already here. So I gave them a headshot and a resume. I went in there, and probably because I didn't have any expectation going in, so I nailed the audition, I got a call back, and the next thing I knew, I got a job. They hired me as a co-host on the show to go to different locations in New York City and eat really good food, go to a spa, pamper yourself, and so on and so forth. It was wonderful.
Nice gig.
I know, it was a great gig. I totally didn't expect it because the main host on the show, she used to be a reporter for ESPN, so she's in my opinion super legit. As opposed to myself, I had no experience whatsoever. But luckily, with a lifestyle or entertainment type of show like that, experience matters, but experience doesn't matter as much as personality. And thankfully, they thought I had this quote-unquote personality. So I did, a contract. I finished out my contract with them, and then they wanted me back. And anyway, that's how I got started. It was complete luck. I still consider myself very lucky. And after I hosted lifestyle entertainment shows, I figured, I actually know some other stuff better than lifestyle and entertainment, such as tech, majored in it, such as business, such as what's going on in the world. And that's when I started hosting current events shows, news or other current event talk shows, morning talk shows, and that's where I am today.
So let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
In the journey that you have been, okay, in the many areas you have touched, what has surprised you? What has been one of the big, any of the biggest surprises that have come your way? Like that audition sounds like it could be a top 10er.
Yes. Well, I was really surprised that I have this talent in me that I didn't realize for 20 plus years. I was always very good at math. I was always a very good standardized test taker, but I didn't realize that I have the ability, after a little bit of training, I would have the ability to carry a show, to entertain a crowd, to actually deliver information, tell a story, whether through a camera or on a live stage. That's something that surprised me because, think about it, from my position, it has never occurred to me.
Right, because, you know, when we think about, and you're so ingrained in the storytelling in your work.
Yes.
And when we think about the storytellers, those are not the mathematicians.
Yes.
Right? In education and growing up, it's like, okay, here are the math science kids and here are the English history kids. And here you are, this amazing storyteller, and that your career today is anchored in that.
Well, it took a lot of training. It took a lot of work, but I didn't realize that I had it in me in the first place.
So I'm always love, you know, I'm a person about relationships. I believe in building relationships. Relationships are the way to navigate a career, a business, and everything. Has there been any significant relationships in your journey that you say, you know what, that made such a difference, and I will be in that relationship, you know, from here to eternity because it did?
Right. So I would say some of my most meaningful relationships are with my closest friends because throughout the years, they were the ones who were there for me. When I'm going into something uncertain, for example, a totally new career that I know nothing about, or some other crazy ideas that I come up with, they are always there supporting me. And it's not necessarily because they believe in this very thing or career or project that I'm taking on. It's because they believe that I am resourceful enough and I can react to any situation. So I really appreciate their trust because I mean I'm sure you've been, you know, in situations in life where all you need to have is permission to get things done. Just, you know, somebody around you encourages you to go forward, and I really appreciate that from my close friends.
And I think that's important. I think the people close to us, there's truly a saying that says the people closest to you are in the, you know, you want to look around you and make sure that they're in the world you want to be living in, not the world you want to be departing from.
Right,
and
exactly.
So when you have that huge support.
Yes, and the other thing about with some of my close friends is they are not from, let's say, super well-to-do families, but they have demonstrated to me that as long as you work hard, as long as you believe in what you do, success is possible. Because if you look at the, you know, social structure of America these days, social mobility is not necessarily everywhere. You know, a lot of people, it is hard to break the circle that you were once part of. And I feel all my friends have proved to me firsthand that it's possible to become somebody people never expect you to become.
And you've clearly broken the circle.
Thank you.
I'm not going into the financial piece, but by breaking out and living your dream as opposed to the culture that you were brought up in, and going for it. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you.
So before we wrap, a couple of last things. Any tip or piece of advice that you might say to women out there? This is one of the biggest things I have learned, or this is something that I suggest for all women to know.
Okay, so I think throughout my career, one of the biggest challenges that I constantly face is people would not give you a chance unless you have experience in something that you want to do. And it takes a lot of pushing, a lot of networking, a lot of resilience to actually find the one person who will give you a chance. So my advice for other women or everybody else is don't be afraid to dream. I know it sounds like a cliche, but don't be afraid. If you want to do something, if you can think of it, if you can think about it, especially if you cannot stop thinking about it, you should go for it, even if you do not know how to get it done and you have no experience in it. And it takes time, it takes sometimes years to find the one person or organization or entity who will take a chance in you. But I think it's worth the search.
Fair enough. So you have to have sparked many, many women's interest and want to know more about you.
Thank you.
And I will say, I really do some research into every person I interview, and I so enjoyed reading about you. So tell everybody else how we could continue to stay in touch with you, follow you, learn from you, and where you're showing up next, because we want to show up there.
Okay, sure. So my website is www.juliasun.tv, or you can follow me on Twitter at juliasun_onair. So right now I am typically on 3 shows. So one is I anchor sometimes at Reuters. It's the global news agency, so you can see me there, Reuters.com. The other place that I go on is Bull TV. It's a millennial morning talk show that happens every Tuesday and Friday. I usually guest host the Tuesday show. And the other show I do is I do a weekly show on this millennial pop culture /reading channel called Bookster, BOOKSTR. And my show is focused on traveling. So every week we get to go to a new destination, and I will introduce a book or two associated with that destination. Last week, for example, we went to Rome, and I introduced a book about Rome that will give you a really good idea about Rome. So you are always welcome to tune in that way.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out. I know it is a very busy schedule.
Thank you.
Joining me here today, and everybody check out juliasun.tv. Follow Julia online, see what she has coming up, and I'm so thankful to you for making an impact on the millennial generation and being a leader with them and for them.
Thank you, Ivy.